WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We been doing a lot of arts this week. We're doing Arts Week. I've shaved. I swore to my wife, and with all due respect to my friends at Liberty Pure and Doug, I'm giving you a shout out. Anybody needs any plumbing or fresh water during this thing, we do have that going on here. As well as, of course, our friends at Raskin Global, and I do have some investments here off camera that I'm going to be chewing on when Luke starts talking. But, Luke, this is the only thing I do that's normal, right? I mean, you and me getting together, usually on a Monday, and saying, hey, man, how was the Masters over the weekend, huh? How was Tiger? And, hey, the Orioles, they're 3-11 now, and they're on their ninth starting pitcher. There's none of that, and it's good to chat with you, but I'm really being honest in some sort of Orwellian way as this thing goes on and rambles on, and we're in the TV reality era every afternoon. You are my only link to normalcy at this point, dude. Like, you and I getting together once a week as we do and, like, pretending there's going to be a football season and pretending the baseball might come back at some point. And, hell, I don't know, the WWE and e-tournaments going on with baseball games that don't exist but exist in the minds of Stratomatic or something like that. I welcome you in for the Twilight Zone, and if I bought the rights to the music, you would hear the little twinkling right now. Here we go, man. We're going to have a draft next week for a season that may or may not happen and a schedule that may or may not come, huh?
Oh, I was just going to say, if you're equating me to some kind of sense of normalcy, that's not good for you.
You are my Rod Serling. Get in here, man. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange. I mean, it's crazy to think that we're only roughly a month since sports shut down, a little bit over that at this point. And
a little bit, right? Like, we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day, which would have been the weekend, which, like, a month ago, I was at Sports Boosters event, right, doing lacrosse, and we were a Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I had Victor Brick on last week. By the way, the stuff in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. Luke, I just want to give a little plug because I have a lot of people that only listen to you and me about sports, right? And I would say that I've done some of the most amazing conversations lately. Like, if you have not heard John Moore from James Joyce speak about this in his Irish accent, if you haven't heard Victor Brick talk about getting up every day and setting an intention and being motivated, and I want to give a shout out to my Planet Fitness partners and Brick Bodies who are all shut down right now, and, you know, talking to people about what they're doing with their time. It's really important that we're all passing time well. So I do hope you and your brother are okay, especially now that they shut the WWE down. I know that's freaking your brother out, right?
Well, they haven't, to this point, they haven't shut down WWE. They had a positive test, but, we'll see how that plays out. In defense of them, they do have an opportunity to have a much more controlled environment within their performance center. But, again, we'll see how it plays out. UFC was going to have, an island they were going to have shows on before ESPN put the end to that. But, I mean, it's very strange. It's all surreal. It's all very dystopian. There's no, I'm not going to try to sit here and normalize any of it. I mean, we're going to have an
dude,
NFL
when you're
draft.
calling something dystopian, it's dystopian. Right, like you're not one for sort of that, I mean, nonsense.
I've been watching pro wrestling shows for the last month without any fans. I mean, and
I haven't. So you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what that looks like. Maybe I need to tune in on that because I mean, everything else is surreal. I don't know. I've tried to stay away from sort of dystopian, surreal. Yeah. I literally have lived in what I'm seeing, and it's weird enough when this Orange Maniac comes on every day, and I tweet about it, and it's like I have people in Harford County who swear that it doesn't happen every night, like that the words that come out on Monday and Thursday that don't connect on Friday, I get chastised as though it never happened. It's bizarre to me, but I haven't watched empty sporting events yet. And I also haven't, sat around watching Tiger Woods throwbacks or Phil Mickelson throwbacks, although on my timeline I understand they exist. I haven't watched the 1985 baseball playoffs. You know what I mean? I haven't watched any of that.
Sure.
I haven't put myself in that mind frame of anything that's not real. I'm trying to stay very grounded in what is real. I'm very into nonfiction right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I hear that, but I also think people, I think there can be too much of that too.
Fair enough.
I really
Fair
do.
enough.
It's funny you mentioned I was just channel flipping. I believe it was Saturday. NBC throwback Stanley Cup final. CBS, Old Masters tournament. ABC had a throwback NBA finals. So you had NHL, you had golf, you had that. Fox had Game 4 of the 2004 World Series on. ESPN had an NBA 2K players tournament. Basically NBA players playing NBA 2K video game. It's very strange.
These are dark times.
Yeah, but I think with some of that, and let's face it, these sports channels, whether you're talking about ESPN or MLB Network, NFL Network, etc., or even these major networks that are used to having, big-time live sports on. I mean, let's keep in mind, in this DVR live streaming, Netflix kind of era, live sports are basically all the networks have that's kind of guaranteed to do well to varying degrees, from the NFL all the way down to NHL or other niche sports or things of that nature.
Well, it is amazing. I am here 24 hours a day. I haven't moved, which isn't all that weird. I see everybody broadcasting from home now and their lava lamps and their friends and pictures and their library behind them, and I have my leg. Everyone is doing this now, right? To some degree. I saw Jamie Costello over a tip of the cap to him, showing where he's setting up on his couch to do the evening news every night. And there is some surreal part of all of that, but I think that, above and beyond all of this is what are we saying and what are we paying attention to when literally every single book ever written is a click away. Every video, every Happy Days episode, every Gilligan's Island episode, everything, every movie, every Netflix, every Wire episode, all one click away that you can binge on at any point, right? So you have the full complement and you have nothing but time on your hands. It really is amazing wherever we put our intention at this point, right? Even I know you spent Easter celebrating with your family together but apart, and I think a lot of folks did that as well, but we get all of these hours in the day where we can't move anymore, and it is amazing how little interest I have in watching Deion Sanders dunk basketballs as a baseball player in a old dunk tournament from 1994. I'm just not enthralled by that right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's fair, and I think we're all handling this in different ways. I mean, there's just waves of this. I think there are times where people feel motivated to, whether they're working from home, whether they're not working, whether they're doing different kind of work than what they're normally doing under a, quote, normal, regular, normal life that they were accustomed to. But I think we also have times where we're not as motivated or we're not as productive as we'd like to be. One of my media friends over the weekend, I saw a tweet that basically said this quarantine confirmed having more time actually makes me significantly less productive. But just because, there's a void there, and it's when you're a sports writer and there's no live sports going on, and there haven't been any live sports going on, and there's not going to be, at least for some substantial time, whether you're on the more positive, optimistic outlook end or the completely pessimistic, realistic, whatever viewpoint you have. It's not going to be for a while.
It is amazing when you're realistic, it's pessimistic. When you say, I might be able to go out of the house June 20th, right? But there won't be a Heritage Fair and there won't be a ball game because we can't get together, and I can't get on a bus and go to New York, and there's no New York when I get there anyway. And once I get there, the restaurants I want to go to, I can't go in. And when you start to break it down, where will this be normal again? Whatever normal would be, we all go together to Merriweather and sit on the lawn and watch the Black Crows or whatever. They're not even normal anymore. We're a long way from that Hootie and the Blowfish concert last summer, Luke. We're a long way from the Twins coming to town and you sitting in the press box and having a hot dog. And And that's not pessimistic. That's just realistic. But it certainly sounds pessimistic, doesn't it?
Yeah. The one thing I will say, and this kind of goes back to what we talked about a couple minutes ago, it's been roughly a month. Now, believe me, that's not me sitting here saying that things are going to be back to normal in a month or necessarily in 2 months or 3 months or 4 months or 6 months or a year or whenever a vaccine comes out. One thing I will say, and this was something that I read a little bit about and watched a little bit over the weekend, is what's going on in South Korea right now. Daniel Kim, great follow on Twitter. I believe he was an interpreter for the Mets when they had a Korean ball player some number of years ago. I can't remember the player specifically that he was the interpreter for, but covers the KBO in South Korea. It's well documented how South Korea has handled this over the last 6 weeks, and they under the understanding that they're not having fans for the foreseeable future, and it's kind of a moving target if and when they will have fans be at their games in 2020. But their players, their teams are gathering once again now. I think everyone understands at this point, or I'd like to think everyone understands at this point, that even getting back to certain segments of normalcy is going to involve testing. So that's what they have. They have temperature screening. And Daniel Kim kind of broke down exactly what the KBO is doing right now. They're kind of in the midst of, I guess you'd call it spring training. I mean, the timing's of it different than what their normal schedule is. And they're going to be starting to play some exhibition games here over the next couple weeks. And they are currently hoping to start their season in early May. Now, every day is kind of wait and see. Knock on wood, hold your breath, whatever strategy you want to use in that regard. But in an interview that he did, I believe it was with a New York outlet, I believe Newsday, I want to say it was. But he talked about the fact that their society in South Korea is, he estimated it's about 60% normal right now, to the point where, you can go into Starbucks, restaurants with a smaller type capacity, go into stores. They have malls open, but it's there's an understanding that your temperature screen, that you're wearing a mask. They're still not opening up anything, like a club, for example, where you'd have hundreds of people crammed into a tight space. But
well, it's interesting for me because I was in South Korea, which feels like 5 minutes ago, right?
Right.
And I was in a baseball stadium, literally, that looked like Tropicana Field, where I saw U2 back on December, whatever date that was, 5th. It was literally in the aftermath of the Buffalo Bills-Ravens game, to give you a time. So it wasn't that long ago that I was literally in those ballparks, in those subways, which feels very New York-y, right? I mean, it's a densely, incredibly populated place that was very smoggy, as I remember it. I mean, people were wearing masks then, which I felt like last day we were there, we choked on the smog. It was gnarly, and so people, there was already sort of a distancing part of the culture. But I mean, you're talking about a place that is way more active than Baltimore or Philadelphia, maybe more along the lines of New York than anything we have in our society, as far as getting people together I'm talking about.
Sure. And that's where, I do take some semblance of cautious optimism. It's cautious, but when you look at something like that, and look, I mean, you could hear in the next day or two that the KBO has 5 players test positive for coronavirus and the league shut down again. That's understood as far as some of the realities of where they are. But with the testing, with the precautions, with the fact that everyone there is wearing masks out, in society, and that they screen everyone that's coming into the ballpark, as far as players, as far as trainers, personnel, coaches, etc. But they're moving toward, at this point in time, as you and I are talking right now, they're moving toward potentially starting the KBO season in the next few weeks. So now, that doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that we're going to definitely have Major League Baseball, and certainly not having any expectation as far as fans, at least on any kind of meaningful wide scale, 40,000 type capacity. And I don't think the KBO has that expectation now. But, again, you can check out this interview, Daniel Kim. In fact, I'm probably going to tweet it because.
By the way, I'm on his Twitter. Thank you for this. This is this is great.
And for me, it wasn't just hearing about baseball, which, as you know, Nestor, South Korea. Baseball. Very passionate about the game there.
Everywhere I went, I saw Major League Baseball hats.
Yeah,
so like at the U2 concert, I saw 15 different Major League team hats.
Yeah. Certainly they have. We had Hyun-Soo Kim here in Baltimore for a couple years. They track the Korean players who come to the major leagues, which there aren't an abundance of them, but there are enough. From that standpoint, it was just interesting to hear where they are at this point because it's been talked about so much as far as how they, from the time they had their first reported case, their testing and everything was right in place. Clearly in the United States that did not happen, but my point is we've talked about the fact that we're a little over a month now since sports shut down. There's a lot of time to go in the spring and the summer and the fall. That's where, look, I think we all need to be prepared for the possibilities of sports just not being a thing in 2020 in any capacity. But I think there are paths, I think there are tracks where we could have some. And, whether it's an empty stadium, whether it's a reduced schedule, whether it's other concessions that need to be, accepted and made, I think there are paths where we can have some of that at some point. And Look, I'm going to be very clear. I'm not a doctor. I'm not trying to speak as an expert. I'm using the context of what is happening right now in South Korea with the understanding that the KBO may never kick off their season if there's an outbreak. But with what they're doing and what they're attempting and the fact that they have gotten back to some semblance of at least parts of their society having some normalcy, although not what it was pre-virus, of course, that's where you do look at it and say, okay, maybe they can execute a Arizona, Florida, Grapefruit League, Cactus League, Major League Baseball season that consists of, 70 games and having some kind of condensed postseason and have something without fans in the stands, and it's something that could be on TV. I'm not going to say that can't happen. I'm skeptical. I'm not nearly as confident about it as I would have been, say, a month ago, speaking about that scenario, because I think we're all trying to wrap our heads around this, just in our daily lives, let alone thinking about sports or thinking about going to concerts or anything like that. But if you're someone that's trying to find reasons for hope from a sports context, just because we miss it. I miss baseball.
Well, and then the draft's coming next week, so you are going to get this little scoop of, of dessert here where there's going to be a real draft. We're going to pretend there's a season, and we're going to, certainly Eric DeCosta hasn't been pretending, right? He is, preparing the draft, right? And trading and signing and free agenting. So from that perspective, we could sit here and pretend there is no pandemic and just talk about football in a bubble. That wouldn't, I don't know, that wouldn't be honest. But that being said, they're going to do this next week, right?
Yeah. I think that much is clear at this point. Roger Goodell put out the internal memo a couple weeks ago to basically tell teams to knock it off with the complaining. And I can understand his point. It's certainly, the optics of complaining about logistics for free agency or logistics for doing a draft via Zoom and being online and using phones, compared to real problems out there. Yeah. I think that's a situation where I actually will stick up.
Well, I'll tell him. I missed that on 3 days at the Breakers 2 weeks ago too, and I should have been in the Tulips of Amsterdam 4 days ago. And by the way, my flight for Pearl Jam in Oakland was going to leave in 5 days, right? So hanging out with Julio and eating fish tacos and drinking margaritas and eating my favorite dim sum. Yeah, but that's none of that's happening. Instead, right. My wife's making chili and we're freezing it, trying to eat it later, and I'm trying to exercise and, fix the world and, I don't know, try to find an inside linebacker or something, right?
Yeah, well, and from the standpoint of the draft, and you and I kind of scrimmaged this as far as the merits of having free agency, and I certainly could understand, both sides of it. It was something that I initially was kind of personally against, but as it went on, it was kind of nice to have that normalcy within the sports conversation context. Not just for you and I, but just for Ravens fans, for football fans, to have something to talk about other than the next sporting event being canceled. So I think from that standpoint, and let's face it, you have college football players who have either exhausted their eligibility or they went pro. I don't know what purpose it really serves to leave all of those individuals in limbo, whether we're talking about first-round picks or whether we're talking about those guys that hope to be a priority free agent, an undrafted free agent to catch on with a team and pursue the NFL dream for a year, or in some cases a week or two, if you're talking about that. Now, we know that they're not going to be in their team facilities anytime soon, but I think going on with the draft, it'll be fun. It'll be something to talk about. It'll definitely be weird. I think there's going to be a lot of, you've already seen the number of fantasy football jokes out there as far as what happens when some GM's internet goes down, auto draft, auto pick, the kind of stuff we talk about with fantasy football drafts. But that weirdness aside, the fact that we do have the NFL draft, it's something that feels kind of normal. And the reality is, once the NFL draft comes and goes in the next a little over a week, then it does become, well, what's next? What is going to be the next sporting event? In any capacity. Forget about 70,000 people in a stadium. Like, how about just golf? How about NASCAR races without without folks in the stands? I mean, there's very much a sense of a moving target of even when some small-scale stuff without fans involved can even.
Well, everybody wants to be the first one back, right? But no one really wants to be the first one back.
You're right. They all want to be first, and they're terrified to be first. I think that's what was. Just look at the trigger, the chain of events that would have happened at some point. But I think what happened with Rudy Gobert in the NBA. The NBA closes up shop, and it made it much easier for everyone else to shudder at that point. It would have happened. It's not as though they would have continued to play, but would we have seen a week's worth of empty arena NBA games if the positive test didn't come when it did? Probably. And I'm not sure how much more harm that would have done in the grand scheme compared to where we are right now. But from that standpoint, Adam Silver in the NBA said, we've got to shut down. We just have to do it, and then everyone else does it. So on the back end of this, and look, I have no idea what that timeline is going to be. I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be 3 months or 6 months, or I have no idea. I'm not nearly smart enough. I think some of the most trusted medical experts out there would tell you they don't really know for sure as far as how certain elements of this are going to go. But I think in the meantime, I think it's